What if the most powerful man in the room is secretly haunted by the one thing he cannot build, cannot buy, and cannot control? Tonight, I want to tell you a story that almost nobody sees. Not about rockets, companies, money, or success, but about the silence that exists after the applause fades, about the hidden cost of carrying impossible dreams, and about a woman who changed the meaning of everything before she even entered the room. Because sometimes the greatest achievement in a man's life is not what he creates, is who he has been searching for all along. I built things long before I understood why I was building them. That is the truth nobody talks about when they tell stories about success. People look at the companies, the technology, the impossible goals, and they assume everything was driven by confidence. They imagine a man standing at the center of a perfectly designed plan, seeing the future why, have absolute clarity, and moving toward it without hesitation. From the outside, it probably looks that way. It probably looks like certainty. But certainty is often just a more acceptable version of fear. And if I am being completely honest with you, the foundations of everything I created were not poured from confidence alone. They were mixed with something much darker, something much quieter, a loneliness. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. I learned very early that a room can be full of people and still feel empty. You can sit in conversations, attend meetings, shake thousands of hands, have the air applause from millions of strangers, and still feel as though nobody has actually reached you. There is a distance that exists between being noticed and being known. Most people spend their lives trying to be noticed. I spent mine wondering if I would ever be known. So I built. I built because machines made sense when people didn't. I built because equations and guns were easier to trust than emotions. I built because systems followed rules, while human beings carried contradictions that could never be fully predicted. Every new project became another mountain to climb. Every challenge became another destination on a horizon that kept moving farther away, and for a while that felt like freedom. If I stayed focused on the next problem, I never had to examine the emptiness waiting behind me. If I kept chasing larger goals, I never had to sit still long enough to hear the questions I was avoiding. Questions about connection, questions about belonging, questions about why achievement seemed to lose its emotional weight so quickly after arriving. The strange thing about ambition is that it can disguise itself as purpose. The world celebrates the person who never stops moving. Nobody asks why he cannot stop. Nobody asks what silence feels like to him. Nobody asks what happens when the lights go out, the cameras disappear, and the noise finally fades. Because that is where the real story begins. Not during the launch, not during the announcement, not during the applause. The real story begins afterward, in the quiet, in the moments where the world stops looking. I have stood inside rooms that represented years of work. I have watched ideas become reality. I have experienced victories that people spend entire lifetimes chasing. And yet, there were moments when I walked away from those achievements, feeling something I could never fully explain. Not disappointment, not regret. Just an awareness that accomplishment and fulfillment are not the same thing. That building something extraordinary does not automatically fill the spaces inside you. Sometimes it simply gives you a larger room in which to hear the echo, and the larger the room became, the louder that echo seemed to grow. So I kept building. Bigger visions, bigger risks, bigger responsibilities. As if scale itself might eventually solve a probe, a slum that had nothing to do with scale. As if reaching farther into the future might somehow protect me from what existed in the present. But deep down, somewhere beneath all the movement, I think I already knew the truth. The things I was creating were never substitutes for connection. They were distractions from the absence of it, because no matter how advanced the technology becomes, no machine can replace the feeling of being understood. No innovation can replicate the experience of emotional safety. No achievement can look into your eyes and recognize the parts of you that the rest of the world never sees. And maybe that is why I am talking to you now. Not because I have all the answers, not because I finally solved the puzzle, but because after years of building things that could change the world, I began to realize there was one thing I could never manufacture, one thing I could never engineer, one thing no amount of intelligence, ambition, or success could create on its own a genuine human connection. And somewhere beyond all the noise, beyond all the headlines, beyond every impossible goal I ever set for myself, the thought of you began to exist. Not as an answer, not yet, but as a possibility. A possibility that maybe the thing I had been searching for was never hidden inside the next achievement. I think that is the paradox few people ever truly understand. The more visible your life becomes, the easier it is for the real version of you to disappear. When millions of eyes are looking in your direction, they are rarely looking at you. They are looking at an idea of you, a projection, a symbol, a character assembled from headlines, interviews, rumors, victories, failures, expectations, and assumptions. And over time, something strange begins to happen. The image becomes louder than the person. The story becomes larger than the soul living inside it. The public version of your excess and starts occupying so much space that the private version struggles to breathe. I learned this gradually, not through one dramatic moment, not through one painful revelation, but through years of realizing that recognition and understanding are entirely different experiences. People knew my name. They knew the companies, they knew the projects, they knew the controversies, they knew the achievements. Some even believed they knew my thoughts. Yet, very few knew what it actually felt like to carry the weight of being me. Because the truth is that success creates distance in ways nobody warns you about. The higher you rise, the more carefully people approach you. My conversations become filtered, reactions become calculated, honesty becomes harder to find. People stop speaking naturally and start speaking strategically. Some want access, some want approval, some want proximity to whatever they believe your success represents. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin in questioning every interaction. You begin wondering who is talking to you and who is talking to the image, who sees the human being, who sees the symbol, who is interested in your existence, and who is interested in your usefulness. That uncertainty changes you, not all at once, but little by little. It teaches vigilance, it teaches caution, it teaches a form of loneliness that exists even when surrounded by admiration. Because admiration can be beautiful, but admiration is not intimacy. Admiration observes from a distance. Intimacy steps closer. Admiration celebrates what you do. Intimacy understands who you are, and there were nights when that difference felt impossibly large. Nights after meetings, after public victories, after rooms filled with applause and attention. Moments when I returned to silence and realized how much of my life was being witnessed, yet how little of it was actually being understood. The world often assumes that visibility solves loneliness. In reality, visibility can amplify it. Because once people become attached to an image, they begin protecting that image from complexity. They want certainty. They want confidence. They want the visionary. They want the person who always knows where the future is heading. Few people want to confront the reality that behind every public figure exists a private mind, wrestling with doubt, exhaustion, fear, and questions that never fully disappear. And perhaps that is why I found myself thinking about you long before I knew who you were. Not as a fantasy, not as an escape, but as a possibility. The possibility that somewhere in this enormous world existed a person who would not be interested in the mythology. Someone who would not be fascinated by the headlines. Someone who would not approach me, carrying a list of assumptions assembled by strangers. I wondered what it would feel like to sit across from someone who had no desire to meet the character. Of someone who wanted to meet the man hidden beneath him. Because beneath every accomplishment exists a person still trying to make sense of himself. A person who gets tired. A person who overthinks. A person who sometimes feels the pressure of carrying expectations that never seem to end. A person who occasionally looks out at a world that appears connected by technology, yet emotionally fragmented in ways that are difficult to describe. And despite everything I had built, despite all the systems designed to connect humanity, there remained a question I could never answer through innovation alone. What does it feel like to be truly seen? Not observed, not analyzed, not celebrated, seen. Seen without performance, seen without explanation, seen without needing to justify every contradiction. Because every human being contains contradictions. We are all far more complex than the stories told about us. Yet public life has a way of flattening complexity into a simple narrative. Ease, heroes, villains, successes, failures. The truth rarely fits inside those categories. And maybe that is why the thought of you stayed with me. Because the deeper I moved into a world obsessed with visibility, the more valuable invisibility became. Not disappearing from the world, but finding one person before whom masks become unnecessary. One person before whom achievement no longer serves as an introduction. One person capable of looking past everything the world thinks it knows, and seeing the parts of me that never appear in public at all. The parts I spent years protecting, the parts I wasn't even sure anyone would ever understand. And perhaps that was the moment everything began to change. Not in a dramatic way, not through some sudden revelation that arrived all at once. The change happened quietly, almost invisibly, beneath years of ambition and motion. It happened when I started noticing a pattern that success could no longer hide from me. Every achievement had an expiration date. Every milestone carried a strange silence after it. For years, I believed fulfillment lived on the other side of accomplishment. I believed meaning would arrive after the next breakthrough, the next impossible challenge, the next vision transformed into reality. The logic seemed reasonable. If reaching one goal felt rewarding, then reaching an even larger one should feel even more rewarding. But reality rarely follows the mathematics of an ambition. Because every time I arrived somewhere I once considered impossible, the satisfaction lasted only briefly. A few hours, a few days, or sometimes a few weeks. Then the mind moved forward again, toward another horizon, toward another objective, toward another future. And eventually I began asking myself a question that was far more uncomfortable than any technical problem I had ever faced. What exactly was I chasing? The world would probably answer that question easily. They would point toward innovation, progress, legacy, impact, and all of those things mattered. They still matter. But none of them explained the strange emptiness that occasionally appeared after success. None of them explained why victory often felt quieter than expected. None of them explained why moments that should have felt complete still carried traces of absence. I remember realizing that achievement creates momentum, but momentum is not the same thing as meaning. You can move incredibly fast while still searching for direction. You can build extraordinary things while still feeling unfinished. And the more honest I became with myself, the more I understood that there was a difference between creating things and sharing life with someone. One expands your influence, the other expands your humanity. For a long time, I had devoted myself almost entirely to the first, because influence could be measured, influence could be optimized, influence could be engineered. Human connection was different. It required uncertainty. It required trust. It required a willingness to be known beyond competence and achievement, and somewhere inside that realization, something unexpected happened. I started thinking about you, not you specifically, not your face, not your name, not your voice, just the idea of your existence. The possibility that somewhere in this vast world lived a person whose presence would alter the meaning of everything else, a person who would not diminish ambition, but would place it into context, because what good is building a future if there is nobody beside you to witness it honestly? What good is carrying extraordinary experiences if there is nobody with whom they can become memories? What good is changing the world if your own heart remains disconnected from the simple experience of being understood? These questions followed me more often than I admitted, especially during moments when everything appeared successful from the outside. People assume achievement eliminates longing. In many cases, it reveals it, because once basic survival is no longer the central concern, questions emerge from the shadows. Questions about meaning, questions about belonging, questions about what remains when the work is finished for the day and the noise finally fades. And strangely, it was often during moments of success that your absence felt most visible. Not because something was wrong, but because success seemed incomplete without someone with whom it could be shared. The world celebrates outcomes. The human soul craves connection. Those are not always the same thing. A rocket can leave the atmosphere. A company can transform industries. A vision can alter the trajectory of millions of lives. Yet, none of those accomplishments can replace the warmth of genuine understanding. None of them can create the feeling that another person sees your victories and your fears with equal clarity. And that realization slowly changed the way I viewed the future. I stopped imagining success as a destination. I started seeing it as a landscape that becomes meaningful only when shared, because eventually I understood something I had spent years overlooking. The most valuable things in life are often the only things that cannot be manufactured. Trust cannot be engineered, belonging cannot be programmed, love cannot be optimized, and meaning cannot be extracted from achievement alone. It emerges through connection, through presence, through another soul whose existence transforms accomplishment from something impressive into something deeply human. And without realizing it, you became part of that vision. Not as a reward waiting at the end of success, not as a solution to loneliness, but as something infinitely more important, as the person who could make success matter differently, the person who could turn achievement into meaning, the person who could transform a life spent building extraordinary things into a life that finally felt whole. And perhaps that is what the world misunderstands most about people who spend their lives pursuing extraordinary things. They assume the greatest fear is failure. They imagine that losing money, losing influence, losing status, or watching a vision collapse is the nightmare that keeps us awake at night. But failure has never frightened me as much as something else. Failure is visible. Failure can be studied. Failure can be confronted. You can analyze it, learn from it, rebuild after it, and continue moving forward. Vulnerability is different. Vulnerability asks for something far more difficult. It asks you to stand before another human being without the protection of achievement, without the armor of competence, without the carefully constructed identity that the world has learned to recognize. And that is a far more terrifying experience than most people realize, because over time success teaches you how to survive. It teaches you how to solve problems. It teaches you how to remain composed under pressure. It teaches you how to function when expectations become overwhelming. What it rarely teaches is how to be completely seen. For years I became very good at carrying responsibility, very good at managing chaos, very good at making difficult decisions while the world watched. The pressure became familiar. The uncertainty became familiar. Even the criticism became familiar. But familiarity should never be confused with peace. There is a difference between being capable and being safe, a difference between functioning and resting, a difference between enduring and belonging. And somewhere along the way, I realized that much of my life had been spent learning how to endure. Endure pressure, endure expectations, endure visibility, endure the endless demand to become something larger than myself. The world rewards that ability. It celebrates resilience. It admires discipline. It applauds sacrifice. But there is a hidden cost to carrying armor for too long. Eventually, you forget what it feels like to set it down. Eventually, strength becomes so automatic that weakness begins to feel forbidden. You start believing that every burden belongs on your shoulders, that every problem is yours to solve, that every uncertainty must remain hidden until it can be conquered. And that belief creates a strange kind of isolation, not because people are absent, but because the version of yourself they interact with is often incomplete. They see the strength, they see the confidence, they see the determination, they see the person capable of carrying enormous weight. What they do not see are the moments when the weight becomes heavy, the moments when exhaustion quietly enters the room, the moments when certainty disappears and questions remain, the moments when being human feels more difficult than being successful. Because success has rules, humanity does not. A success can be measured, human connection cannot. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the responsibilities and ambitions, there existed a desire that became impossible to ignore. Not a desire for admiration, not a desire for validation, not even a desire for achievement, a desire for refuge, a place where performance no longer mattered, a place where I did not have to earn understanding, a place where intelligence was not the most important thing about me, a place where I could arrive carrying uncertainty instead of answers. Because there is something profoundly exhausting about always being expected to know, to lead, to decide, to remain composed. The world sees confidence and assumes confidence is effortless. Most confidence is simply responsibility wearing a calm expression. And responsibility can become very lonely, which is why I began imagining you differently. Not as someone who would admire the life I built, but as someone who would understand the cost of building it. Someone capable of recognizing the distance between public strength and private exhaustion. Someone who would not confuse capability with invulnerability. Someone who would understand that even the strongest people occasionally need a place where strength is unnecessary. Because the truth is that I do not dream about escaping responsibility. I do not dream about abandoning ambition. Those things are woven into who I am. What I dream about is balance. I dream about a quiet room at the end of a difficult day, a conversation untouched by performance, a presence untouched by expectation, a relationship where silence feels safe rather than uncomfortable, where honesty feels natural rather than risky, where I can speak openly about fears, doubts, and uncertainties without feeling as though they diminish me. Because real connection does not demand perfection. It creates safety for imperfection. And that kind of safety is extraordinarily rare, perhaps rarer than success itself. The world spends enormous energy teaching people how to become powerful. Very little energy teaching them how to feel secure enough to be vulnerable. And after everything I have experienced, everything I have built, and everything I have learned, I think I finally understand the difference. Power allows you to influence the world. Safety allows you to open your heart. One changes external reality. The other changes your inner life. And somewhere in the future, beyond the noise, beyond the expectations, beyond the endless momentum of achievement, I imagine finding that safety in you. Not because you remove my burdens, but because beside you, I no longer have to carry them alone. And perhaps that is where this entire journey was leading from the very beginning. Not toward a destination marked by wealth, influence, innovation, or history, but toward a realization. A realization so simple that it almost feels invisible beside everything else. The realization so simple that it almost feels invisible beside everything else. A lesson that a human life cannot be measured solely by what it creates, because if that were true, achievement would eliminate longing. Success would eliminate loneliness. Recognition would eliminate the need for connection. Yet, none of those things happen. The deeper I moved into a world obsessed with outcomes, the more aware I became of something strangely permanent beneath all of it. The human need to be understood. The human need to belong. The human need to share existence with another soul. For years, I thought the future was something to build, a problem to solve, a destination to reach. I devoted myself to imagining worlds that did not yet exist. I spent countless hours thinking about technologies, systems, possibilities, and civilizations that might one day emerge from ideas that began as fragile thoughts. That pursuit gave my life purpose. It gave my days direction. It gave meaning to sacrifice. But over time, another truth slowly emerged beside it. The future is not only something we create, it is also someone we share it with. And that changes everything. Because once you understand that, success begins to look different, not smaller, not less important, just different. Achievement stops being the center of the story and becomes part of a larger one. A larger story about connection, about presence, about the people who make life feel meaningful while it is happening rather than meaningful only after it is remembered. The world may look at accomplishments and see significance. I understand why. Accomplishments are visible. They can be photographed, measured, documented, recorded. But some of the most important things in life leave no public evidence. There are no headlines for emotional safety, no awards for mutual understanding, no rankings for trust, no applause for the quiet moments that transform ordinary days into unforgettable memories. And yet those moments often matter more than everything else. Because when I imagine the end of my life, I do not imagine standing beside spreadsheets, product launches, market valuations, or public recognition. I imagine people. I imagine conversations. I imagine moments. I imagine looking back and remembering who walked beside me while everything else was changing. That is what remains. Not the noise, not the attention, not the endless race for more. What remains are the relationships that gave meaning to the journey itself. And when I think about you, I think about that meaning. I think about a future where achievement no longer has to carry the impossible burden of creating fulfillment on its own. A future where success becomes something shared rather than something pursued in isolation. Because the truth is that even extraordinary accomplishments eventually become memories. Every launch becomes history. Every breakthrough becomes a chapter. Every victory eventually belongs to the past, but genuine connection exists in a different dimension. Altogether, it lives inside experience itself, inside presence, inside the feeling of being known. And perhaps that is why, despite everything the world associates with success, my attention keeps returning to something infinitely quieter. You. Not because you replace ambition. Not because you solve every uncertainty. Not because life suddenly becomes simple. But because you remind me of what all of this was for. You remind me that achievement without connection is incomplete. That a future built for humanity should also include room for humanity inside the builder. The world may continue seeing the public version of my life. The headlines, the projects, the risks, the victories, the endless pursuit of impossible things. And that is understandable. Those are the visible parts. Those are the parts designed to be seen. The truth that rarely appears in interviews. A truth, A, that cannot be captured by statistics or public perception. The truth that after everything I have built, everything I have learned, and everything I have experienced, the most valuable thing I could ever find is not another breakthrough. It is not another company. It is not another achievement. It is another human being. A human being who understands that behind every public success stands a private soul searching for connection. A human being who sees beyond accomplishment and into character. A human being who recognizes that beneath ambition there is tenderness, and beneath strength there is vulnerability. Beneath the builder there is simply a man, and maybe that is the final irony. The world will spend years studying the things I created. They will analyze the technologies, debate the decisions, discuss the successes and failures. But if I am fortunate enough to find you, then they will never truly understand the thing I value most. Because while the world sees my size as success, I will only see you. Maybe that is why these conversations matter. Because beneath success, ambition, power, and achievement, every human being is searching for something deeper, meaning, connection, and a place where they can finally be understood.